The sun peeked through the kitchen window, spilling soft golden light across my little dining room in Portland. I had been up since dawn, humming an old tune as I rolled out pie dough, the smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air. Sundays were special to me, not because they were peaceful, but because they brought my family together. Ever since my husband, Richard, passed away 10 years ago, I had promised myself that I'd keep our Sunday dinners alive. He loved watching our children laugh around the table, and even now I could almost hear his deep chuckle echoing in the background. I laid out the floral dishes Richard had gifted me on our 20th anniversary. Each plate carried memories, birthdays, holidays, even arguments that ended with laughter. I wanted tonight to feel the same. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Olivia, were coming, along with my daughter, Grace. It had been a long week for all of them. Daniel, working long hours as a software engineer, barely had time to rest. Grace, always tired from her counseling job, said she needed this dinner more than anything. I checked everything twice. Roast chicken in the oven, salad on the counter, apple pie cooling near the window. The ticking clock made me anxious, not because I was nervous about the meal, but because lately something had felt different. When Olivia called earlier that morning, her voice sounded strange. She said she'd try to come. That word, try, stuck with me. She had never said that before. Still, I brushed the thought aside. Families have ups and downs, I told myself. Maybe she was just tired. I poured wine into crystal glasses, straightened the napkins, and lit a vanilla candle in the center of the table. The soft flame danced like a heartbeat. My house smelled like home again, the way it used to when Richard was alive. As I looked around the table, my heart swelled with quiet pride. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. I whispered softly, "You'd be proud of us, Richard." The sound of the doorbell pulled me back to the present. I wiped my hands on my apron, took a deep breath, and smiled. My family was home. Daniel stood at the door, tall and confident as always, holding a bottle of red wine. Olivia followed behind, her coat draped over her arm, her eyes tired, but smiling politely. "Hi, Mum," Daniel said warmly, hugging me tight. That one word, Mom, always filled the quiet corners of my heart. I hugged him back, trying not to show how much I'd missed him. Olivia handed me a small bouquet. "These are for you, Linda," she said softly. Her voice was kind, but something about her tone felt distant, rehearsed. I thanked her anyway, placing the flowers in a vase near the window. A few minutes later, Grace arrived, rushing in with her hair still damp from the shower, apologizing for being late. The house was finally full again. Laughter, footsteps, and the clinking of glasses. We gathered around the table, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Daniel told a funny story from work about a malfunctioning office printer. Grace teased him, saying, "Only you could break technology by just looking at it." Everyone laughed. Even Olivia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She sat quietly, occasionally glancing at her phone. I tried not to notice, focusing instead on how the light from the chandelier shimmered off the wine glasses. "You know," I said, "I think this is the best roast I've made in months." Daniel grinned. "Mum, your roast is legendary." "Olivia, back me up." Olivia nodded faintly, murmuring, "It's delicious." But her hands kept fidgeting. She played with her fork, avoided Daniel's gaze, and occasionally let her eyes wander toward the window. I caught it, that uneasy energy, like a secret waiting to break free. I didn't say a word. I've been a mother long enough to know when something's wrong. But I didn't want to ruin dinner. Not yet. Dinner continued, but the warmth began to fade. The more I watched Olivia, the clearer it became that something wasn't right. She laughed when others laughed, but her voice cracked slightly. Her smile seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter. When Daniel reached to pour her wine, she flinched almost imperceptibly, a moment so small it could have gone unnoticed. But I saw it. Grace looked at me across the table, her eyebrows knitting in confusion. She sensed it too. "Everything okay, Olivia?" Grace asked gently. Olivia nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just tired," she replied, forcing a small grin. Daniel didn't seem to notice, absorbed in talking about his latest software project. I smiled politely, but my mind was racing. When the pie was served, Olivia excused herself to the bathroom. Minutes passed. I found myself staring at the clock again, tapping the table. The silence grew awkward. Daniel sighed. "She's been a bit off lately," he admitted, his voice low. "Work stress, maybe." I nodded, pretending to agree, but deep down, I knew it was something more. Olivia returned, her face pale. She sat down without a word, eyes downcast. Grace tried to lighten the mood, talking about her students, but Olivia's blank stare didn't change. I noticed her fingers trembling as she lifted her fork. My heart ached with worry, but I stayed quiet. Years of motherhood had taught me that sometimes silence reveals more than questions. As the meal ended, I started clearing the plates. Olivia stood to help, offering a shaky smile. "I'll take those," she said softly. "You've done enough, Linda." I nodded and followed her into the kitchen, the air heavy with unspoken tension. The kitchen was warm and smelled of apple pie and dish soap. Olivia stood beside me, drying plates while I washed. The faint hum of conversation drifted from the dining room, where Daniel and Grace chatted. Then, without warning, Olivia's hands stopped moving. Her voice trembled. "Linda, I need to tell you something." I looked at her, half expecting it to be about a new job or a small fight with Daniel. But her face told another story. Pale, lips trembling, eyes wet. She leaned closer, her whisper almost inaudible. "I'm pregnant. But it's not Daniel's baby." The plate slipped from my hands and shattered in the sink. The sound was sharp, final, echoing through the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought she could hear it. What did you say?" I whispered, my voice barely holding together. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean for this to happen." For a moment, time stood still. The laughter from the dining room faded into distant noise. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My knees felt weak, my world spinning. I turned away, clutching the counter, trying to steady myself. My throat burned. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, I whispered, "Does Daniel know?" She shook her head. "No, I don't know how to tell him." I stared at her. This young woman I had welcomed into my family, loved like a daughter. And for the first time, I didn't recognize her. I stood frozen in that kitchen, surrounded by the faint scent of soap and pie, unable to think or move. The sound of the clock ticking suddenly felt deafening. Olivia kept wiping her tears, whispering apologies that barely reached my ears. My heart was breaking, not just for Daniel, but for everything I had believed about our family. "Please, Linda," she pleaded softly. "Don't tell him tonight." I need time. I couldn't answer. My lips moved, but no words came. I nodded weakly, not out of agreement, but because my body didn't know what else to do. She slipped out of the kitchen quietly, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, staring at the shattered plate in the sink, feeling as if my whole world had cracked with it. When I finally returned to the dining table, Grace and Daniel were laughing about something. I forced a smile, my hands trembling under the table. Olivia sat beside Daniel, pretending too. Her face was calm again, but I could still hear her whisper in my head, those words echoing like a curse. The rest of the evening passed in silence, wrapped in fake laughter. When they finally left, I sat alone in the dim light, staring at the empty chairs. The house was quiet again, too quiet, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel peace in that silence, only fear. That night, after everyone had gone home, Linda sat in her armchair, staring at the flickering shadows on the wall. The words Olivia whispered kept replaying in her mind like a broken record. I'm pregnant, but it's not Daniel's baby. Her heart ached, and she could feel her pulse in her throat. The quiet of the house felt unbearable. Every tick of the old wall clock echoed like thunder in the silence. She stood up, pacing slowly, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her temples. What do I do now? She whispered to herself. She wanted to believe it wasn't true, that maybe Olivia was mistaken or confused. But the tone of her voice, the fear in her eyes, it all felt too real. Linda knew she couldn't ignore it. She went to her bedroom and opened the drawer that still held her late husband Richard's photograph. You'd know what to do, she murmured, tears filling her eyes. Richard had always been the calm one, the voice of reason. But now, it was just her, an old woman trying to protect her son from heartbreak. She sat on the bed, clasping her hands together, trying to pray. God guide me, she said softly. But even prayer brought no comfort that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's smile, his trust, and imagined it shattering when he found out the truth. By 3 a.m., she hadn't slept a minute. Her phone buzzed once. It was a message from Grace. Mom, you seemed off tonight. Everything okay? Linda typed back, just tired, sweetheart. But she wasn't tired. She was terrified. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and looked around at the house she had spent decades turning into a home. Every family photo, every memory, was a reminder of love and stability. She couldn't bear the thought of that piece being ripped apart. Yet, she also knew hiding the truth might destroy Daniel even more when he eventually found out. By dawn, she sat by the window, watching the sun rise through the mist. Her face looked pale, her eyes swollen from crying, but there was a quiet determination in her heart. I can't let him live a lie, she finally said aloud. When the morning light filled her living room, Linda had made up her mind. She would tell Daniel. No matter how painful it would be, she couldn't let her son build his life on a secret that was bound to explode someday. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Linda made breakfast, but barely ate a bite. Her hands shook as she set Daniel's favorite mug, the blue one with the chipped handle, on the counter. When Daniel walked in, still half asleep, he smiled faintly. Morning, Mum. You're up early? Linda forced a smile. Yeah, couldn't sleep much. Her voice cracked a little, and Daniel noticed. Everything okay? He asked, pouring himself some coffee. Linda hesitated. She looked at her son, the same boy who used to run around the house with scraped knees and messy hair, now a grown man with a calm, trusting face. Her throat tightened. Daniel? She began slowly. There's something I have to tell you. It's about Olivia. Daniel's eyebrows furrowed. What about her? Linda took a deep breath. Last night, after dinner, she came to me. She said something that's been haunting me since. He set his cup down, worry flashing across his face. Mum, you're scaring me. What did she say? Tears, down, worry flashing across his face. Mum, you're scaring me. What did she say? Tears welled up in her eyes. She said she's pregnant, but the baby isn't yours. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Daniel's face went blank. He blinked, trying to process her words. What? He whispered, his voice trembling. Linda's hands shook as she reached out. Son, I didn't want to tell you like this. But I couldn't hide it. You deserve to know the truth. Daniel stepped back, his breath uneven. No, no, that can't be true. She wouldn't. He stopped mid-sentence, the denial in his eyes giving way to pain. He turned away, pressing his palms to his forehead. Why would she tell you that? I don't know, Linda said softly. Maybe guilt. Maybe she couldn't carry it anymore. Daniel's voice cracked. Mum, I loved her. I thought we were happy. Linda's tears finally fell. I know, sweetheart. That's why this hurts so much. But you can't live in a lie. You're stronger than that. Daniel stood in silence for a long moment. Then he whispered, I need to talk to her. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out the door. As the door slammed shut, Linda collapsed on the couch, her chest heavy with both relief and heartbreak. She had told the truth, but now, the storm had only begun. When Daniel reached home, Olivia was in the living room, folding laundry. She looked up, startled. You're home early? She said, her voice uncertain. Daniel's tone was cold. Why did you tell my mother? Olivia froze. The colour drained from her face. She told you? Yes, he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. You told her you're pregnant, but not with my child. Why, Olivia? Why would you do this to me? Olivia's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen? He laughed bitterly. You betrayed me, Olivia. You betrayed everything we built together. Grace, who had stopped by to pick up something she left earlier, stood at the doorway, stunned. What's going on? She whispered. Olivia turned toward her, sobbing. It's true. I made a mistake. I thought I could keep it hidden, but I couldn't. Daniel's face turned pale with anger and disbelief. You thought you could hide it? From me? From my mother? The tension in the room grew unbearable. Olivia broke down completely, falling to her knees, crying uncontrollably. I was lonely, Daniel. You were always at work. I did something terrible. I wish I could undo it, but I can't. Daniel's voice cracked. I gave you everything, Olivia. I trusted you with my whole heart. He turned to Grace, who stood frozen, tears in her eyes. Please, just stop, Grace whispered. This isn't helping anyone. Daniel shook his head. No, Grace. The truth needed to come out. He looked at Olivia one last time. You destroyed our home. With that, he walked out, slamming the door behind him. Olivia stayed on the floor, sobbing, and Grace slowly walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. You need help, she said softly. But right now, give him time. The house was silent again, except for Olivia's broken cries echoing through the emptiness. The life they built together had fallen apart in a single, unbearable evening. Days passed in silence. Daniel stayed with Linda, barely speaking. He sat on the porch most nights, staring into the dark, lost in thought. Linda tried to bring him meals, but he barely touched them. One evening, the doorbell rang. Olivia stood there, pale and exhausted. Please, she said, her voice shaking. I just want to talk. Daniel hesitated, but finally nodded. Come in. They sat across from each other at the dining table. Olivia took a deep breath. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quietly. But I need you to know the truth. Daniel's jaw tightened. You already told it. No, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. I need you to understand why. It wasn't love. It wasn't anything real. I was broken, Daniel. You were always busy, and I felt invisible. I made the worst mistake of my life. Daniel's voice was cold. You didn't just make a mistake. You broke something that can't be fixed. Olivia nodded. I know. And I'll live with that. But please don't let this destroy you too. You're a good man, Daniel. Don't lose that because of me. He looked away, fighting the urge to cry. It's too late for us. Olivia stood up slowly. I'm sorry. For everything. As she walked out, Linda watched from the hallway, her heart heavy. She knew there were no winners in this story, only broken hearts learning how to survive. After Olivia left for good, the house felt unbearably empty. Daniel moved out a week later, saying he needed space. Grace returned to her apartment, and Linda was left alone once again, just her and the silence. She tried to go about her days like before, watering the plants, organizing books, walking to the mailbox, but nothing felt the same. Even the ticking clock felt louder, crueler. One evening, Linda sat at the dining table with a single plate in front of her. The same table that once echoed with laughter and family chatter now stood in hollow stillness. She looked at Richard's photograph on the shelf and whispered, "Our family's broken, Richard. And I don't know how to fix it." Tears streamed down her face as she picked up her fork, but she couldn't eat. She just sat there, lost in memories. Daniel's first birthday cake, Grace's high school graduation, the Christmases filled with love and chaos. Now, it was all gone. That night, as she turned off the lights, Linda whispered to herself, maybe I shouldn't have told him. Maybe I should have protected him. But deep down, she knew truth always surfaces, no matter how hard we try to bury it. The home that once felt alive was now just walls and echoes. Yet somewhere deep within her, a faint hope remained, that someday, somehow, her family would find its way back. It had been 3 long weeks since Daniel moved out. Linda woke up each morning hoping for a call, a text, anything. But her phone remained silent. She had stopped expecting him to reach out. She assumed he needed distance from everything, including her. But one morning, as she walked to her front porch to collect the mail, she saw an envelope addressed in Daniel's handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a short, neatly folded letter. "Mum," it began, "I needed time to breathe. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to process everything. What happened broke me, but I'm learning to understand that it wasn't your fault, or even entirely mine. You did the right thing by telling me the truth. It hurt, yes, but I know you saved me from living a lie." Linda's eyes blurred with tears as she read on. "Sometimes I get angry thinking about how my life fell apart. But then I remember you sitting across from me that morning, trembling, brave enough to say what I needed to hear. You've always been stronger than I realized." He ended with, "I'm not ready to come home yet, but I'll visit soon. Please take care of yourself. I love you, Mum." Linda pressed the letter to her chest and sobbed quietly. For the first time in weeks, she felt warmth in her heart. The pain hadn't vanished, but the words gave her something she hadn't felt since that dinner: hope. She placed the letter in a wooden box on her nightstand, the same one where she kept Richard's old watch and her wedding ring. That night, as she looked out her window, she whispered, "He's healing. Thank you, God." The letter didn't fix everything, but it reminded her that even in heartbreak, love doesn't disappear. It just takes time to return. A few days later, Grace showed up at Linda's door with a suitcase and a tired smile. "I'm staying for a while," she said softly. Linda blinked in surprise. "Are you sure? Don't you have work?" Grace nodded. "I took some time off. You shouldn't be alone right now." It felt strange at first, having company again. But within a few days, the house began to feel alive once more. Grace cooked dinner, helped with chores, and filled the silence with her gentle laughter. One evening, while organizing old boxes, Grace found a stack of flyers from years ago. "Mum," she said, "remember your reading club?" Linda smiled faintly. "How could I forget?" It was my little world. Back then, Grace looked thoughtful. Why don't you start it again? People loved it. You've always had a gift for connecting with others. Linda hesitated. Do you really think anyone would come? Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. Yes. People need stories just as much as they need truth. You taught me that. The next week, Linda reopened her neighborhood reading club. At first, only 3 people showed up, 2 elderly neighbors and a teenager who loved poetry. But word spread quickly. Within a month, the living room filled with laughter, books, and warm cups of tea. Linda realized something as she read aloud to the group one afternoon. Pain can close your heart for a while, but sharing stories, listening, understanding, can open it again. That night, Grace looked at her mother and said, "You're glowing again." Linda smiled and replied, "Maybe because for the first time in months, I feel like I belong somewhere again." It was a rainy afternoon when the phone rang. Linda almost ignored it, thinking it was another telemarketer. But when she answered, the voice on the other end froze her in place. "Linda, it's Olivia." There was silence for a moment before Linda spoke. "What do you want?" Olivia's voice cracked. I'm in the hospital. The baby's coming early." I didn't know who else to call. Linda's mind went blank. She hadn't spoken to Olivia since that awful night. "Where's Daniel?" she asked quietly. "He doesn't know," Olivia whispered. "I didn't have the courage to tell him. Please, I can't do this alone." Linda closed her eyes. Her instinct told her to hang up, to stay away from the pain, but her heart, the mother in her, couldn't. "Text me the address," she said finally. An hour later, Linda stood by Olivia's bedside, watching her breathe through contractions. The room smelled of antiseptic and fear. Olivia looked up weakly. "I didn't think you'd come." Linda took her hand gently. "You're still family," she said softly. "No one should be alone at a time like this." As hours passed, Olivia cried, screamed, and clutched Linda's hand through the pain. When the baby finally arrived, a tiny, crying boy, Linda felt something shift inside her. She held him carefully, her heart trembling. He was innocent. He didn't carry anyone's mistakes, just new beginnings. Olivia wept. "I don't deserve your kindness." Linda looked at the newborn and whispered, "No one is born guilty, sweetheart. Life gives us chances to do better." Take this one. Linda visited the hospital often over the next few weeks. She helped Olivia care for the baby, who she named Ethan. Each time Linda held him, her heart softened a little more. One afternoon, Olivia said quietly, "Daniel deserves to know about his brother." Linda nodded. "You're right." When Daniel arrived at the hospital, his expression was unreadable. He looked at Olivia, then at the baby. "Why did you call me here?" he asked flatly. Olivia whispered, "Because you deserve the truth and closure." She gestured toward the crib. "This is Ethan." Daniel looked at the baby, then at his mother. Linda's eyes were gentle. "He's not responsible for what happened, Daniel. Don't let anger poison your heart." Daniel took a deep breath, walked to the crib, and stared at Ethan. The baby reached out, clutching his finger. Something in Daniel broke, something heavy he'd carried for months. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "He's beautiful," he whispered. Olivia sobbed softly. "I'm so sorry." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. Maybe one day we'll all heal." As he turned to leave, Linda stopped him. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, son. It means freeing yourself." That night, Linda felt peace for the first time in a long while. She realized forgiveness wasn't about who deserved it. It was about who needed it most. Months later, Linda hosted another family dinner, the first since that unforgettable night. She decorated the table with fresh daisies, the same flowers she'd used years ago when everything was simpler. Grace arrived first, helping her set the plates. Then came Daniel, hesitant, quiet, but smiling faintly, and finally Olivia, holding baby Ethan. For a brief moment, the air felt thick with tension, but then Ethan giggled, breaking the silence. Linda laughed softly, passing him a toy. The sound of his laughter filled the room, washing away months of pain. As they sat down to eat, Daniel looked around the table and said, "It feels different, but it feels good." Linda nodded. Families change, but love doesn't disappear. It just learns to grow around the cracks. They ate slowly, sharing small stories, tentative smiles replacing the old hurt. For Linda, it was as if life had come full circle, from heartbreak to healing, from silence to laughter again. When dinner ended, she looked around the table, at her son, her daughter, her once estranged daughter-in-law, and the baby who unknowingly reunited them all. She thought to herself, love survives the storm, even when we think it can't. As everyone said goodbye that night, Linda whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. Her family was imperfect, fragile, and scarred, but together again. And as she watched Daniel hold baby Ethan in his arms, she knew that life had given them a second chance to write a better story.